The Only Road, Chapter 11. No one slept that night, and there was no bonfire. Only about 15 of the 150 staying at the church were using El Gordo's services. Inside the church, the sheet that divided the men's quarters from the women and children was pulled aside as more than half of the people gathered their things and made plans to face the beast, or La Bestia, as it was nicknamed, also known as the train. Advice bounced around from the veteran train riders and everyone else who liked to give an opinion. "Don't travel by yourself," said a man who had been deported twice back to Nicaragua. "Don't trust anyone," said a pregnant Honduran woman, wrapping a tight shawl around her shoulders. The grumpy woman who served them food grumbled, "You're better off just going home. You'll never make it." A few others, particularly the old people, murmured in agreement. One man said, "If the train slows down, it could be an immigration stop, or a trap. If you jump off, don't be scared of the ground. It'll hurt you less than the train wheels or the gangsters' gunshots." The Nicaraguan chimed in again. Cesar, who played football with them and had been on the train a few times, told everyone they weren't that bad. "Just give the gangs what they want. No big deal." Of course it was a big deal, especially when the gang wanted your life. But warnings and opinions weren't enough to change minds. Most people were determined to board La Bestia anyway. They didn't have a choice. "I'm still getting on the train," Xavi announced as their group sat by the river with Vida licking a bone from the meat El Gordo had brought. "Rafa, Joaquin, you're coming too, right?" "Obviously." Rafa looked at him with mock disbelief as if there would be another answer. Joaquin stared at Xavi with scared eyes as he shifted from one foot to another, then he blinked in agreement. "Do you have any money?" Jaime asked. It'd be much better if they went with him and Angela. If only El Gordo would strike a deal with them, take whatever the three could afford and call it even. But Jaime knew El Gordo would never go for that kind of deal, not after he'd kicked the man who had insisted he had paid. Xavi ran a hand through his hair, which made it stand up as if his thoughts had electrified it. "I left El Salvador in a hurry, with only enough money for the bus ticket here. I stole this uniform shirt from a washing line just over the Guatemala-Mexico border. I have nothing left except my phone and charger." From Joaquin's pockets came 200 lempira coins. The boy turned them over as if he were studying the engravings. Jaime had no idea of their value, but he guessed it was next to nothing. Rafa, Jaime knew, had gambled away the little money he had. Inside Angela's backpack, they had the remains of the food from home and a few pesos for another couple of meals. It was better than nothing, but still not fair. These boys didn't even have a change of clothes. "How are you going to stay in the train without any money?" Angela put her hands on her hips in a way that gave her an uncanny resemblance to Abuela, and no one messed with their grandmother. Xavi couldn't look her in the eye. Not in, on. Jaime remembered playing trains with Miguel when they were younger. Miguel always liked to balance the passenger toy people on top of the train cars and see how fast he could roll the train before the plastic people fell off. Xavi was talking about doing the same, except as a real-life person. Angela shook her head. "Don't. It's too dangerous." "But what's the alternative?" Xavi folded his arms over his chest and paced back and forth. "If we walk or hitchhike, sooner or later we're going to get caught. This whole journey is dangerous. Most of the people have to attempt it several times. Cesar is on his 6th try. None of us can return home either. We're not staying here to wash dishes for Kevin Padre for the rest of our lives." "But you can wash dishes for someone else until you've earned enough money to get properly on the train," Angela pointed out. Rafa laughed as he put a casual forearm on Angela's shoulder. "It would take ages to save up that much. I don't want to work that hard. Besides, who's going to hire us when we saw half our football team also looking for jobs to pay their way north?" Angela pushed his arm off her and gave him a reproachful look before turning back to Zavi. What if something happens to you? He didn't look at her. Things happen all the time. Sure, if you go looking for trouble, she snapped back. You're not my mother, Jaime told his cousin in a low whisper. You're not their mother, Jaime told his cousin in a low whisper. He didn't want anything bad to happen to these boys either, but he understood that what they did was their choice. Don't worry about us. It'll be fun, Rafa said. Fun, right, Jaime thought. That boy sure had a twisted idea of what fun meant. But Jaime imagined if their lives weren't at stake, riding a train cross-country would be fun. Going through big cities and one-horse towns, getting the conductor in his striped hat to toot the horn, borrowing a piece of coal to draw it all. Yes, that would be fun. If it were realistic, maybe not thinking of the reality was what kept Rafa optimistic. Well, what will you do if La Migra catches you? Angela demanded, as if she knew they didn't have real answers. Drop it, Jaime said, this time loud enough for them all to hear, though no one listened. Zavi pointed to the uniform shirt that claimed him as a student at a Mexican school. La Migra officer on the bus had bought the disguise, except now the shirt was stained with dirt and Vida's blood. It worked for me so far. Rafa pulled his letter from his jeans pocket and showed it to Zavi and Angela. As usual, he volunteered information without being asked. I sent this to myself using an address here in Arriaga. The letter contained a long plea from my abuelita up north to come for a visit before grandfather dies. See, this way if La Migra tries to deport me, I have the letter from my Mexican address dated a couple weeks ago. They'll think that I'm Southern Mexican, which explains my accent. Jaime and Joaquin looked at each other and then at the older kids, not knowing what to say. It was Zavi, after glancing through the letter, who finally said, except this letter supposedly came from the northeastern state of Coahuila, where your grandparents live, but it has the Arriaga postmark. Zavi folded the letter back into the envelope and returned it to its owner. Rafa's mouth dropped open in disappointment as he realized his plan wasn't as clever as he thought. Do you have a way to avoid getting deported? Jaime asked Joaquin. The boy seemed so helpless and innocent, Jaime wondered how he could possibly have made it this far on his own. I can sing the Mexican national anthem, Joaquin said to his shoes, and didn't notice the others looking at him in surprise. Partly because it was a much better ruse than the fake letter, partly because he knew the words, but mostly because he dare sing it when he barely spoke. Angela wrapped the young boy in a tight hug before grabbing Zavi's hand and giving it a squeeze. Fine, I'll help you get ready. You need a plan and a few backup ones in case things go wrong, 'cause they will. She led the way back into the church to the wall where route maps and safe house locations were displayed. Jaime lagged behind with Zavi while the older boy dragged his toes along the dirt floor. I'm sorry she's acting like this, Jaime muttered. She's not usually so bossy. The corner of Zavi's mouth went up, but the smile seemed sad, distracted. It's her way of showing she cares. Jaime supposed. He knew Angela liked being in charge and taking care of people. She was a lot like Abuela and his mama that way. But he'd never seen her like this before. Before Miguel, she'd never... Maybe that was it. Maybe she also thought there was more she could have done to save Miguel. Maybe by helping these boys they could make it up to Miguel. If that was the case, he was all in. There wasn't much to do to help prepare the boys for their journey. They had no money, no supplies, and not much time left. The best they could do was memorize the locations of the safe houses throughout Mexico. Jaime drew replicas of the map in his sketchbook and gave a copy to everyone, and come up with ideas to keep them from harm. Other than, do not get caught, there weren't too many options. Still, Angela fussed with their clothing, tried to rid Zavi's uniform shirt of bloodstains, and offered to tailor Joaquin's clothes to fit him better. The little boy tugged the sides of his extra-large shirt and bunched the excess fabric to his chest like a blankie. He fiercely shook his head. She didn't pressure the boy, but turned to Zavi, her eyes moist. "Please take care of Joaquin." "Of course," Zavi said. He took a deep breath and then nodded to the trees along the river. "Walk with me for a second?" The two walked toward the river. Jaime placed a hand on Vida to keep her from following. With a little food and a lot of attention, life had returned to Vida. She still whimpered every time she tried to walk, but a doggy smile when she sat next to her humans showed she was glad to be alive. Jaime was going to miss her. He'd never had a pet. Animals back home weren't companions. They either produced food like eggs or milk, or they were food. But because he helped save Vida, he had become a friend too. She had become a friend too. Angela and Zavi came back a couple of minutes later. The nighttime made it hard to tell, but Jaime was pretty sure both of their faces seemed redder than before. Had they kissed or something? "We better go." Zavi snuck a glance at Angela, who was definitely blushing. Jaime hugged each of the boys, while Angela gave them the traditional farewell cheek kiss. Joaquin, however, wrapped his arms around Angela's neck and planted an actual kiss on her cheek, like a little kid to his mama. Zavi picked up Vida and placed her between the two hammock slings that Angela had sewed from rag scraps Padre Kevin gave them. Because of Vida's belly injuries, Angela thought it would be better for Zavi to wear two slings, one on each shoulder that crossed over Zavi's chest and back. This allowed the dog to be supported by her front end and hindquarters instead of her middle. Vida struggled at first, but then settled down when Angela placed a reassuring hand on her head and rubbed her one ear. "We change trains in Medias Aguas. If there's a long wait, we'll see you there," she said, repeating the plan even though they had already gone over it. "Otherwise, at the safe house in Lecheria." "Sí," but it was impossible to tell by the sound whether Zavi had said sí, meaning yes, or sí, if. "Keep on the lookout for any trouble. Don't get caught. Be safe," she called out. The three boys walked briskly up the road. At the top, they turned around and waved before disappearing into the dark night. For several minutes, the cousins watched the top of the road, the last place they saw their friends. "You like him, don't you?" Jaime didn't have to clarify which him he meant. "I barely know him." Angela scuffed her sneaker back and forth on the dirt road. "But yes." Jaime took a deep breath to distract himself from thinking what he didn't want to think, that meeting up with their friends when the train stopped either in Medias Aguas or farther north in Lecheria probably wouldn't happen. "Well, as the man of the house at the moment, I permit you to see him." "Man?" Angela shoved him playfully on the shoulder. "You can't even grow a mustache yet." Jaime shrugged. "I'll paint one on." They teased back and forth until a dog barking in the distance reminded them of their friends. Angela instinctively grabbed Jaime's arm. Jaime held her close, holding her arm that was holding his. Even with Vida's rescue, Angela hadn't gotten over her dog phobia. Jaime didn't mind. It was a nice feeling knowing that he could comfort Angela from some of the scary things the world had in store for them.